Recently, I was talking with a friend about how 2020 had been just about the worst year any of us can remember. He, like many, is excited to say goodbye to it. I mentioned that by the Jewish calendar, 5780 was just about the worst year any of us can remember, and that 5781 so far is looking a bit better. He agreed that it's nice we Jews can get a jump on our recovery. I mentioned the story because generally from this bima, if I speak about dates and calendars, I speak about the Jewish calendar, the lunar calendar. But in fact, today's Gregorian date, December 5th, is an important one to Jews. Anyone know why? December 5th is when we begin to pray for rain. Now, how did we end up with this secular date to mark a Jewish liturgical change? What does it have to do with praying for rain anyway? And wait a minute, didn't we already start praying for rain back on Shmini Atzeret? A few caveats. The actual first moment of praying for rain is Mariv on December 4th, last night, December 5th Eve, if you will. As you know, Jewish days begin at sundown, not sunrise, so this simply aligns with the Jewish daily prayer cycle and the solar date. Second, we didn't really start praying for rain last night. Why? Because the prayer for rain occurs during the 9th blessing of the Shemona Esrei, our central prayer, also called the Amidah, which contains 19 brachot during the week, but only 7 on Shabbat. That's because the middle 13 blessings we call the bakashot, that is the petitionary prayers, aren't recited on Shabbos, but get replaced by one bracha that focuses on the holiness of this day. Which means, are you with me? That the prayer for rain, which by tradition should have begun last night, December 4th, and continued in this morning's Amidah, December 5th, actually begins tonight, December 5th at Mariv, after Shabbat. Now, this is not such an odd move if you think about it. We tend to move observances up or postpone them when they happen to coincide with Shabbos. This is true for modern observances like Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut. It's also true for ancient ones like Tisha B'Av. In other words, Judaism contains a long history of tension between certain behaviors like fasting or words like petitionary prayers and a day which is meant to provide a break from that kind of stuff. You might be thinking right now, Rabbi, who cares? I mean, fine, it's December 5th, not December 4th, but the salient question, I think, isn't which day in December. The bigger questions are, why are we talking about December at all and not the Hebrew month of Kislev? And why not Tishrei or Cheshvan? And what I want to suggest is that this date reflects a tension in two areas: the land of Israel and its centrality in our prayers, and the extent to which the liturgy is a relic of the past versus a living, breathing set of responses to the world as it is. Okay, so to get to the bottom of this conundrum, we need to spend a little time unpacking the prayer for rain itself. Truth be told, there are two places in our Amidah we focus on the importance of rain. The first we actually did say today. We said it in Shacharit, and we'll say it again in Musaf. That's the line in the second bracha when we chant Ata Gibor Leolam Adonai Mechayei Meitim Ata Rav Leoshea. You are ever mighty, Adonai. You give life to the dead. Great is your saving power. And then we say Mashiv Haruach Umorid Hagashem. You cause the wind to blow and the rain to fall. This is the line that changes each year on two holidays. On Pesach, when most of you are sleeping off a late night of Manischewitz, brisket, and matzah, others of us make our way to shul or log into Zoom so we can hear the beautiful 7th century prayer for dew. From that time and through the Sukkot holiday, which marks the final harvest festival of the cycle, we add the line Morid Hatal, who makes the dew fall, or we simply omit the additional words here. But on Shmini Atzeret, the day after Sukkot, the hardy folks who aren't sleeping off, again, a late night last hurrah in the sukkah, warily drag ourselves to shul or log into Zoom to hear the mesmerizing 7th century piyut for rain. That's, of course, because wherever Jews are living, Poland, Yemen, Spain, India, Africa, we view the land of Israel as central to our national identity. So, if ostensibly, it doesn't matter if it's raining or not, rather, it doesn't really matter if it's raining in Australia or New York, Eretz Yisrael has two seasons, wet and dry. The dry season goes from spring until fall, and the rainy season, you guessed it, from approximately Sukkot to Pesach. The Geshem prayer then marks the beginning of this new line in our prayer service, Mashiv HaRuach Umorid HaGashem, which lasts throughout the rainy season. Okay, so if that's the case, that we start praying for rain not in winter but in fall, and not according to the solar calendar, but on Shmini Atzeret, which is always the 22nd of the lunar month of Tishrei, what gives? Well, first of all, the line we add to the Gvurot section of the Shemona Esrei is not actually a prayer for rain. It's an acknowledgement of God's role in bringing about a bountiful agricultural yield and ordering the universe in such a way that things happen in their time. That doesn't always happen as planned, and we shouldn't take it for granted. But in a real way, that's why we have the actual prayer for rain in the Bakashot, those petitionary prayers that I mentioned earlier, which we only do on weekdays and not on Shabbat. Here's the actual text of the bracha. Adonai our God, make this a blessed year for us. May its varied harvest yield prosperity. May the land be blessed and satisfy us with its goodness. Bless this year that it be like the best of years. Baruch atah Adonai mevarech hashanim. Blessed are you, God, who is the source of blessing each year. So what's the essence of this bracha? Hebrew Union College's preeminent scholar of liturgy, Larry Hoffman, says it relates to the prayer for healing that comes just before it. As the individual needs healing, so too does the land on which we live and from which we receive our nourishment. But you might be asking, where is the explicit mention of rain? That comes with the addition of three little words, tal umatar livracha. In the rainy season, we say not, may the land be blessed, but may the land be blessed with dew and rain and satisfy us with goodness. One small aside before we tackle the question of when on the calendar we make this liturgical change. Did you notice anything strange about this line? Dew and rain. Didn't we just spend a bunch of time explaining that there's a season of dew and a season of rain, and those are different seasons? So the most likely explanation, one brought by 20th century scholar Louis Ginsburg, is that the line was corrupted at some point and probably read, grant rain for blessing in the winter and grant dew for blessing in the summer. C'est la vie. So, when do we actually begin to pray for rain? There are two prevailing customs. In the land of Israel, it's added on a Hebrew calendar date, the 7th of Cheshvan, which is 15 days after Sukkot concludes. Why wait at all? The Eretz Israeli minhag follows the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, who in the Mishnah explains, Kedei sheyagia acharon shebeyisrael lin har prat, in order to give the last of those in Israel time to arrive at the Euphrates River. Remember, Sukkot, like Pesach, like Shavuot, was a pilgrimage festival, which meant that Jews would come to Jerusalem to observe the holiday, and when it was over, they needed to get home. Praying for rain by Jews of the homeland while their brethren and sistren make the arduous journey back to Babylonia might feel a bit thoughtless and contrary to the spirit of, Jewish diaspora relations. This is what I mean by the land of Israel and the tension underlying its centrality in our prayers. Yes, we start praying for rain starting tonight here in Baltimore, whether or not we want it to rain here in Baltimore, because it's not about Baltimore. But there's space in the tradition to honor those who live in far-flung communities, particularly because they have an ongoing relationship with the land and the people who live in the land. The Siddur recognizes that to pray for rain on the 22nd of Tishrei means, by extension, to pray to make the lives of the pilgrims more difficult. The Galilean farmers can wait a couple weeks, which brings us finally to the second custom, which is that in Babylonia itself, the prevailing practice was not to begin Tal Umatar Livracha on 7 Cheshvan, but on, as we know, December 5th. Why on earth is that? Well, it comes from the Babylonian Talmud in Masechet Ta'anit, which stipulates that the prayer for rain should begin 60 days after the autumnal equinox. That, as calculated by 3rd century Babylonian sage Shmuel and others, is the day when day and night are of equal length. That's why it's called the equinox, a solar date from which we can extrapolate and recite Tal Umatar Livracha at Mariv on December 4th and continue at Shacharit on December 5th, at least in 2020. One final exception, because there's always an exception, right? Last year, on 2019, when December 5th was not Shabbat but a Thursday, we began on Wednesday night, the 4th, right? Wrong. Because now that we're in solar calendar land, we have a problem. What's the problem? The Gregorian calendar is also not perfectly aligned with the Earth's revolution around the sun, which is why we have every 4 years a leap year. And last February, guess what, had a 29th day, which means that last year the prayer for rain got bumped one day and was recited, you guessed it, Thursday night, December 5th, and Friday morning, December 6th. So if you ever wondered why many Siddurim have a note at this blessing that reads, for example, from December 5 to Pesach, December 6 in a Hebrew year divisible by 4, this is why. It's possible I'm the only one who ever wondered that, but I don't think so. Because last year's Hebrew date was 5780, which is divisible by 4, and this math lines up nicely with the December of each year preceding a civil leap year. If we want to get super wonky, as if this hasn't been wonky enough, at the century mark, most but not all of the time, there is no leap year. Did you know that? So, as Ben Gurion University scholar Daniel Lasker points out, in the 19th century, the prayer for rain began in Mariv of December 3rd or 4. Since 1900 was not a leap year, it jumped to December 4 or 5 in the 20th century. 2100 will also not be a leap year, and in the 22nd century, Tal Umatar will begin in Mariv of December 5th or 6th. Given enough time and no calendrical reform, eventually Jews outside Israel will start praying for rain on the eve of Passover, just in time to stop this prayer when Passover begins. But that will take a really long time. So instead of worrying about that right now, let's finally ask the million-dollar question. Why does the Talmud stipulate a winter date for the rain bracha? It doesn't say. But later scholars like Reuven Hammer believe it's because earlier rain in the Babylonian world would, wait for it, damage their date crops. Remember, my second suggested area of tension, the extent to which the liturgy is a relic of the past versus a living, breathing set of responses to the world as it is. The Gemara doesn't come out and say it, but there was clearly a concern in the Babylonian Jewish community that if they pray for rain in September or October and God actually answers their prayers, they would be in trouble, so they fudged it. But the really interesting thing is that because they did, we here in Baltimore and Jews around the world mostly practice this same custom. You might wonder if there was an attempt to change this. Actually, there was. The 13th century posek, Rabbeinu Asher ben Yechiel, the Rosh, tried to establish the principle that each Jewish community would pray for rain when they actually needed it in their own country. But according to Lasker, This attempt was rebuffed by his contemporaries. The Rosh's failure to innovate a change in the practice, no matter how sensible it might have seemed, was a major reason why no one in the Northern Hemisphere ever again challenged the prevailing practice. This even holds up for the most part in the Southern Hemisphere, where the order of the seasons is actually reversed. Lasker writes, "The result is that to this day, Jews throughout the diaspora set their liturgical calendar in this regard according to the agricultural needs of Iraq, a country which is now almost devoid of Jews." So, what do you think? Does the Siddur reflect the centrality of Eretz Israel or the diaspora? Is our liturgy a relic of the past or a living, breathing set of responses to the world as it is? The answer, of course, is yes. There are many ways in which our focus remains on the national Jewish homeland, its history, its people, and its agricultural requirements. But the land of Israel sits in relationship with the diasporic Jewish community. So they wait 15 days to pray for rain. And yes, there are ways that we get stuck in the past, fixated on one period. One need only look at Williamsburg or Borough Park to see Hasidim dressed in the clothing of 17th century Polish nobility to understand that tendency. Or consider why we would resist praying for rain because of Babylonian date crops. But don't forget, we do pray for those date crops. There are lots of examples of places where we adapt tefillot, or we add new ones, or sometimes eliminate irrelevant or even offensive ones. The Siddur is, in fact, a living thing, because Judaism is a living thing, and balancing the needs of this community with that one, or this time period with that one, is what the great dance of Jewish living is all about. Shabbat Shalom.